the more and more I would come to Ghana for those immersion trips for my organization, the harder it was for me to go back to the States. I had a conversation with my wife and I said, you know what? I think the next place in our journey is Ghana. For the first couple months, I mean, I would wake up and I would just be like, wow, we're in Africa. Like we're actually living here. And it was really exhilarating and exciting. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a human being disconnected from the color of my skin, and it was transformational. So the difference between visiting Ghana for a holiday or
good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are watching us from, and welcome back to this YouTube channel.
And live the life of their dreams. I got introduced to Ghana almost 16, 17 years ago through an organization that did mission trips, actually. And they said, we're going to Africa next year. That's the only thing I heard. I didn't know where Ghana was, and it just so happened they were coming to Ghana for 7 weeks during a mission trip over the summer. And I said, I have to go. It was a part of like my lifelong dream to, go back home to the motherland and reconnect with my roots. And so I did. And in that 7 weeks, that was 2007. And in that 7 weeks that I was here, my life was transformed. My ideas about myself, about African history, about my standards of beauty, about our historical memory and intellect, all of that was transformed. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a human being disconnected from the color of my skin, and it was transformational. And so since then, Ghana has had a place in my heart. Yeah, so it took some time, for me. I was visiting for maybe about 10 years at this point. I had a nonprofit organization that was operating here, mobilizing people to the continent, as well as doing civic engagement work in rural communities in Ghana. So I already had kind of like some in-depth experience. But really what happened was there was just this increasing racial tension in the United States that had me thinking about myself and then my son, of what kind of life I wanted to have for him and legacy I wanted to have for him. And I just didn't want to raise him in a society where he's being constantly bombarded with the ugliness of racism every single day. And the more and more I would come to Ghana for those immersion trips for my organization, the harder it was for me to go back to the States, because I was experiencing what freedom felt like, just to be free. And then going back to a place where I'm now confined to the color of my skin, regardless of whether or not there's opportunities to prevail and succeed, it was still that constant subconscious understanding that I'm different. And around 2000 and, was it 16 or 17? I don't remember, but I had a conversation with my wife and I said, you know what? I think the next place in our journey is Ghana. So we started planning. It took several years of planning. It wasn't just a fly-by-night decision. If you're listening, okay, this was years of planning, and then we made that decision. December 4th, 2019, we arrived in Ghana. It was a dream come true because for folks out there watching, if you set a goal and you're working towards that goal for so long, for like years and years and years, you keep seeing this reality in your mind. So that when it actually manifests itself, it's almost surreal. It's like, is this really happening? So for the first couple months, I mean, I would wake up and I would just be like, wow, we're in Africa. Like we're actually living here. And it was really exhilarating and exciting. And I'll say that I think we came at the right time, because shortly afterwards, the world, unfortunately was rocked by this global pandemic of coronavirus. And to be in Ghana during the earlier stages of the pandemic was far better than being in the United States. And so I was grateful that we were here. Even though it was challenging, it was definitely better to be here during that time than the States. I think like everyone else during Corona, nobody knew anything. And so everybody was hyper vigilant. Everyone was on edge. Just the normal things that you would do when you move to a new place, like go to social events, network, meet people, find out, hey, you couldn't really do that. And so we were kind of insulated within ourselves and our own family. Our son was out of school, and it was stressful. It was very stressful. It was extremely stressful just trying to navigate along with the rest of the world. Where do we go from here? If and you remember how it was initially. If you sneeze or you cough, people looked at you as if like, like you had, some kind of, just crazy illness. So just navigating those pieces was a little difficult. Yeah. So I think it happened in phases. I think the first phase was like the honeymoon phase where everything was okay. So you would see things, but it would be minimalized because you were such in this surreal moment of like, I'm living in Africa. Some of the things you will see, just like the rubbish problem or sanitation or trash problem, people chopping your money. You think, just one CD, two CDs, that's not a big deal. But for me, I overlooked them. Then the second part of the phase was kind of like, it's like the sober reality of like, you start noticing classism, noticing that, okay, I, as a foreigner coming from the U.S., as an Obruni, I get special treatment. And that's not right. Why am I being put at the front of the line when this person's been waiting for 10 minutes and they heard my accent and they put me at the front of the line? And so seeing those kinds of things, seeing the systemic issues, such as the disparities between certain areas in Ghana, certain regions, oh my God, listen, we can go on and on. And then I think it was just sobering up to the reality that I'm in a great space, but I'm also privileged to be here. And my experience in Ghana is not the typical experience of the everyday Ghanaian or just person living here. And reconciling what's my responsibility to help make an impact where I am, but at the same time not drive myself crazy with trying to solve every single problem. And that was a real challenge for me. Yeah. So the difference between visiting Ghana for a holiday or vacation and living here is, the main thing I always ask people is this. Like I say, imagine if you're visiting a place like the East Coast, right, or the West Coast in the United States, New York or California, and you're going to, I think it's Disney World or Disneyland that's out there. You may saved up $10,000 or $5,000 for a vacation. You're spending $5,000 in a week. Imagine if you were spending $20,000 a month to live. How much income would that have to be just to sustain a lifestyle? It's too much. So the difference with living in Ghana versus visiting is, number one, if you're living in Ghana and you want a lifestyle that is just basic, and let me explain basic to you. Just the minimal amount of blackouts, running water as much as possible, paved roads, you don't have to deal with sewer problems, like seeing open sewers and stuff like that in your neighborhood. You don't have to deal with like burning trash and goats and chickens and cows taking a dump in front of your yard. Like those basic things. That means that more than likely you're going to have to live in probably a gated community or a more developed community. Those communities, if you're living in Accra now, typically you're talking about, depending on your family size, maybe $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 and up a month for rent, dollars, not CDs. And on top of that, you pay 12 months or 24 months in advance. So imagine right now, if you are a single person and you moved into a really nice neighborhood and you had to pay $36,000 up front for rent for a year. That doesn't include your utilities, it doesn't include transportation or food. So the cost of living, particularly in Accra, is relatively expensive. So that's one of the main things. The second thing is, I think that depending on what you're doing here, if you're like running a business or something, that may pose its other challenges, because I always tell people that really to be really successful in Ghana, you almost like the system is here, you have to be here. Like you can't depend on the electricity, the water, even the transportation. You have to literally create your own ecosystem to be successful, which means that it costs more money to have backup energy, your own borehole, which is, for folks who don't know what a borehole is, it's basically like your own kind of water source. All of that stuff costs a lot of money. So yeah, living here can be expensive depending on your lifestyle and just dealing with some of the structural issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people like that, unfortunately, and I think the biggest misconception is particularly people who are coming from more developed nations, and that doesn't mean America, right? Development in America, not synonymous terms, but no matter where you're coming from in the world, when you come to Ghana, the system is just different, and I think that people fail to calculate how much planning it takes to really live here long term, more than 3 years. And I think the things that they don't calculate is the cost of creating that lifestyle that you want, like I just mentioned. If you have kids, right, the cost of putting your kids in a decent school where they get a great education that's not just a chew and pour. Or if you don't know what that means, it's basically like you're just regurgitating information. If you really want your kids to develop some critical thinking, some analytical skills, to engage in problem solving and really be responsible citizens, that means that that's a certain type of school you may have to put them in. Those schools are here, but oftentimes they're very expensive. So I've seen people leave quickest when they don't plan as thoroughly as they should. Yeah, so I had a conversation with someone that I met. They were excited to come to Ghana, and they wanted to start a hair care business. And they heard about the year of return. They heard about free land, you know, in certain places that, you know, the chief was giving away all this land and stuff. And so they didn't do enough due diligence. They moved here, and in less than a year they left. And some of the reasons they went back to America, some of the reasons they cited was, number one, they didn't fully understand the cost of living. Number two, when they were opening their business, they didn't anticipate the high cost of overhead. For example, you know, you may be from a place where to rent a place may be $100 a month. That's how much it is. But then they got here and realized, okay, I gotta rent the place. I gotta pay for installations to have water come to my place. I gotta pay for a transfer of like electricity meter. So all those different things they didn't calculate became overhead that they didn't anticipate. And then they didn't have income that was regularly coming in. They were living off of savings. So it was a lot of withdrawals and not any deposits going in. So that was one of the practical things. And I think, you know, one of the things the person told me one day was they didn't even want to go outside, because every time somebody heard the accent, like they just didn't know who to trust, because people hear the American accent and they were so hyper vigilant that someone wanted to take their money, and people were smiling at them. And so they just began to get, you know, hyper vigilant and what's the word I'm looking? Paranoid. They began to be paranoid, and so they stayed in the house because they just, like, imagine having your money taken, and everywhere you go it's like you want to pay 5 CDs for something, but someone wants you to pay 35 CDs. That's a shock initially. Trying to develop friendships, and then having people steal from you. I know this is sounding really terrible, but let me say what could have avoided this, all right? Because that sounds really bad. What could have avoided a situation like this was like somebody really taking the time to reach out and have somebody consult them through the process, to really help them understand the difference between being here for 2 weeks for a nice vacation and being here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and creating a lifestyle here. If they had that one thing, somebody who really understood the system to walk them through the process, to help them think about it differently, they could have avoided a lot of those things. Yeah, and so I have a book. One of the recent book I just published is called Aquaba, right? The Complete Guide to Your Stay in Ghana. And the reason I wrote this is simply because I got so many emails, so many messages, so many social media posts, people wanting to move to Ghana, and they just didn't know where to start. And I couldn't take the time to, you know, spend 8 hours a day answering everybody's questions. It was just too much. So I said, let me take my 15 years of experience traveling in and out the country, working in the country. I went to school here in Ghana. I started a nonprofit organization that works in Ghana. So I've been.
And the life is going to be so good. You're going to live like in heaven, because you have your countrymen and people of the same black race as you. However, this is true, but there's so many challenges that comes with it. One is the challenge of investing, starting a business. If you are not careful, you are going to spend a lot, because one, you want to give your children best education, and in Africa and most African countries, that's not guaranteed. It's not a priority. It's a priority, yes, but it is not guaranteed, because you have to go look for good schools, those international schools, and it costs quite a fortune for your child to be in that school. So you have to dig deep into your pockets for you to have your children get the quality educations they deserve. And he's talking about, like, okay, he moved from the States just for his son not to grow in an environment where he's discriminated and where the black race is despised. And he moved to Ghana for his son to have a good life. And that also comes with a lot of challenges. You are going to realize that there is a lot that an individual faces when you relocate from the states to Africa. There is a lot, and Ghana is not an exception. Power rationing. One is power rationing, and you have to deal with that. Corruption too. When you want to get something, you have to go the other door and beg for someone with some cash, or request favors, which comes with giving out something like money and giving out some favors too. And in most cases, that's not the case in the United States of America. And this is about a personal experience which highlights most of the things that African Americans who are willing to move to Africa have to get prepared, and what you need to know about coming to Africa. It's not about milk and honey. There are a lot of problems too. As much as you are being united with your countrymen, you are people from the black race, there is a lot of challenges that comes with that, and you have to be prepared. You have to be psychologically prepared, mentally prepared, and physically prepared, financially prepared too, because Africa, you have to spend a lot. And in this case, when you don't know anyone, you have to dig deep into your pockets to get things that you don't have. And the last he talks about is there are a lot of insights. There are a lot of things that we black people do not tell our brothers in the United States of America about Africa. One, they all know Africa is cheap. Yes, as you compare the lifestyle in the United States or in the diaspora and the one we live here, yours is quite expensive. But the moment you move to Africa without any savings, it's going to be so difficult for you. So you must have some savings before coming to Africa. And this means it's not just a one-day thing. It's not a journey that you wake up and decide, okay, I'm going to Africa. It must be properly planned, and there must be steps taken and a lot of preparations done for you to move to Africa. Thank you so much, my brothers. I just did this video to educate you on whatever things and whatever you may be thinking of Africa, and how much preparation, how much prepared should you be while traveling or coming to live in the African continent. Thank you so much, and I love you. Let me see you in my next episode. I love you so much, my Ghanaian fans. Please subscribe to the channel if you find this content so good and resonating with you. Salute.